In the eerie stillness of Willow Creek, veterinarian Ethan Caldwell gets an urgent call. A tiny hairless creature teetering on death's edge in the woods. Thinking it's an abandoned puppy, he rushes to save it, but chilling clues emerge. Oversized eyes, spindly legs, and a cry unlike any dog he's known. As the clinic lights expose its frail form, a shiver runs down Ethan's spine. Before continuing the story, tell me which city you're watching from. I want to know how far this video has come. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so I can send you exciting stories like this every day. Thank you. Ethan Caldwell stifled a yawn as he sorted through the last stack of patient files on his desk. The old wall clock in the waiting area ticked steadily toward 9, its sound mixing with the quiet hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Through the clinic's front windows, darkness had settled over Willow Creek, the small town he'd called home for the past 8 years. Just these last few notes, he muttered to himself, scribbling observations about Mrs. Beatrice's arthritic golden retriever. The day had been busy, but routine. Vaccinations, checkups, and one minor surgery on a cat who'd gotten too curious about a porcupine. Nora Bennett, his veterinary assistant, poked her head around the corner. Almost done with inventory, doctor. Caldwell. Need anything else before I head out? No thanks, Nora. You can go home. I'll just finish these. The shrill ring of the clinic phone cut through the quiet evening air. Ethan's hand hesitated over the receiver. After-hours calls usually meant emergencies, and emergencies meant saying goodbye to his plans for a quiet evening with leftovers and a good book. Nora paused by the door, her car keys jingling in her hand. Want me to get that? I've got it. Ethan picked up the phone. Willow Creek Veterinary Clinic, Dr. Caldwell speaking. Doc? The voice on the other end was breathless and worried. It's Jasper Hayes. I found something. The old logging trail. It's not looking good. Ethan sat up straighter, reaching for a notepad. Can you tell me more about its condition, Jasper? It's tiny, Doc. No fur to speak of, and it's shaking something awful. Found it all alone. No mother in sight. I wrapped it in my jacket, but... Jasper's voice cracked slightly. Don't think it'll make it through the night without help. Bring it in right away, Ethan said firmly. I'll wait for you. Nora had already set her keys down and was pulling her hair back into a practical ponytail. Emergency? Could be. Jasper Hayes found what he thinks is an abandoned puppy. Ethan started gathering supplies, warming blankets, a pediatric stethoscope, and various items they might need for a fragile newborn. Says it's in rough shape. The minutes ticked by slowly as they waited. Ethan's mind ran through possibilities. Perhaps a case of mange causing the hairlessness, or maybe a premature birth. The bell above the door jangled exactly 18 minutes later as Jasper burst in, cradling something wrapped in a warm flannel jacket. Jasper's weather-beaten face was creased with concern. Thanks for staying open, Doc. Never seen anything quite like this little one. Ethan gestured toward the exam room. Let's have a look. Under the bright exam room lights, Jasper carefully pulled back the flannel. Ethan felt his breath catch. The creature was indeed tiny, perhaps no more than a few days old, with paper-thin skin that showed blue veins underneath. Its eyes were unusually large, and its muzzle was longer than he'd expect on a domestic dog. Spindly legs ended in delicate paws, and its entire body trembled with each shallow breath. Where exactly did you find it? Ethan asked, keeping his voice steady as he began a gentle examination. Up near Wheeler's Ridge, just off the logging trail, heard some weak crying coming from under a fallen log. No sign of any other animals around. Jasper shifted his weight nervously. Is it? Will it make it? Nora had already started preparing the warming pad and gathering supplies. Her experienced hands moved efficiently, but Ethan caught the concerned glance she shot his way. This was no ordinary puppy. We'll do everything we can, Ethan assured Jasper, maintaining his professional demeanor despite his growing unease. Thank you for bringing it in. We can take it from here. After Jasper left, Nora moved closer to the exam table. Dr. Caldwell, she said quietly, are you thinking what I'm thinking? Ethan cradled the trembling creature, feeling its rapid heartbeat against his palm. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered once, casting strange shadows across the exam room. He looked down at the animal's distinctive features that were starting to paint a clearer picture of exactly what kind of puppy they were dealing with. The creature let out a soft whimper, nuzzling weakly against the warmth of his hand. Despite his years of experience, despite all the animals he'd treated, this one was different. This one was going to challenge everything he knew about veterinary medicine, and perhaps even test the boundaries of what he was legally allowed to do. Nora began setting up the incubator, her movements precise, but her expression troubled. "Should I start the paperwork?" she asked, though they both knew this case might require more than their usual documentation. The lights flickered again, and Ethan felt the weight of the moment settle around him. This was going to be a long night, and he had a feeling it was just the beginning of something much more complicated than a simple rescue. The tiny creature squirmed in his gentle grip, its oversized eyes still firmly closed, completely unaware of the stir it was about to cause in their quiet little town. Ethan took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. Whatever this animal was, it needed help, and that's what he had sworn to provide, even if doing so might lead him down a path he never expected to travel. Ethan's hands moved with practiced precision as he examined the fragile creature on the padded exam table. The bright fluorescent lights illuminated every detail of its unusual appearance, from its nearly hairless pink skin to its peculiarly elongated features. Nora worked efficiently beside him, arranging medical supplies with the familiarity of their years working together. "Temperature first," Ethan murmured, reaching for the pediatric thermometer. The pup squirmed weakly at his touch, its whimpers growing fainter. Poor little thing's exhausted. Nora nodded, preparing the IV setup while keeping a watchful eye on their tiny patient. "Should I get the warming blanket?" "Please, and the puppy formula." Ethan frowned at the thermometer reading. Slight fever, but nothing critical. Heart rates elevated, though. Jasper stood nearby, wringing his weathered hands. "I was just walking, buddy. That's my retriever when I heard it. Thought I was hearing things at first, but then Buddy started pulling toward this fallen log." He shook his head. "Couldn't just leave it there. You understand?" Ethan listened while continuing his examination, noting the pup's shallow breathing and unusual physical characteristics. When Nora returned with the formula, he carefully attempted to feed the creature, but it turned its head away with a high-pitched squeak that made them all wince. "Dehydration's our biggest concern right now," Ethan said, preparing the IV line. "Nora, could you—" She was already there with the supplies, anticipating his needs as she always did. Together they worked to get the fluid line started, the pup barely reacting to the needle, a worrying sign of its depleted state. "The logging trail where you found it," Ethan asked Jasper. "Was there any sign of a den? Other pups?" "Nothing," Jasper replied. "Searched the whole area. Buddy is usually good at finding things. But," he shrugged helplessly, "just this little one, all alone." The clock on the wall ticked steadily toward 10:30 as they worked to stabilize the pup. Nora prepared the small incubator they usually reserve for critical cases, lining it with soft blankets and adjusting the temperature carefully. "We'll need to keep it overnight for observation," Ethan announced, gently transferring the pup to its temporary home. "The next few hours will be crucial." Jasper's relief was visible in the way his shoulders relaxed. "You'll call if anything changes?" "Of course," Ethan assured him. "Try not to worry. We'll do everything we can." After Jasper left, Ethan and Nora stood looking at their unusual patient through the clear walls of the incubator. Their eyes met, sharing an unspoken concern about the true nature of the creature they were treating. The quiet of the late-night clinic wrapped around Ethan and Nora like a thick blanket. They had dimmed the fluorescent lights in the hallway, leaving just enough illumination to work by. The steady hum of the incubator provided a gentle backdrop to their vigilance, almost like a lullaby for their tiny patient. "Vitals are holding steady," Nora whispered, marking down the latest readings on their makeshift chart. She adjusted the IV line with careful fingers, her movements slow and deliberate, to avoid disturbing the sleeping creature. Ethan nodded, his eyes fixed on the pup's chest, rising and falling in shallow breaths. The fluids seemed to be helping, temperatures normalizing too. He leaned closer to the incubator, studying the creature's unusual features. Those eyes, even closed, were set wider apart than any puppy breed he'd encountered in his 15 years of practice. The triangular ears, though tiny, had a distinctive shape that nagged at his professional instincts. Maybe it's some designer breed, Nora suggested, stifling a yawn. You know how people are always trying to create the next trendy pet. Ethan shook his head slowly. I don't think so. He pulled his laptop closer, the screen's glow, casting shadows across his tired face. His fingers moved across the keyboard, searching through database after database of rare dog breeds. Nothing matched, not even close. The hours ticked by, marked by their routine checks and quiet observations. Every hour they documented the pup's progress, trading shifts between monitoring and brief attempts at rest. The creature remained stable, but fragile, accepting small amounts of fluid through the IV, but still refusing any attempts at feeding. Look at those ear formations, Ethan murmured, more to himself than to Nora, and the bone structure around the muzzle. He trailed off, lost in thought as he made another note in the growing list of observations. By 4 a.m., the exhaustion of their impromptu night shift began to show. Nora had finally given in to fatigue, curled up in one of the waiting room chairs with her lab coat as a makeshift blanket. But Ethan couldn't bring himself to rest. He remained stationed by the incubator, watching the rhythmic breathing of their mysterious patient. Through the clinic's window, the night sky began its subtle transformation, from pitch black to deep blue, heralding the approach of dawn. Ethan rubbed his tired eyes, his mind turning over all the peculiarities of their small charge. Years of veterinary experience told him this was something different. This was no ordinary puppy, and that realization brought with it a weight of responsibility wasn't quite ready to process. The first rays of morning sunlight filtered through the waiting room blinds, painting golden stripes across the clinic's worn linoleum floor. Nora stirred in her chair, her neck stiff from the awkward sleeping position. She blinked away the remnants of sleep, orienting herself to the familiar surroundings that somehow felt different after their unusual night watch. Ethan hadn't moved far from the incubator, his dedicated vigil evident in the dark circles under his eyes. The pup inside made a soft whimpering sound, weak but distinctly stronger than the previous night's cries. A small victory that brought a tired smile to Ethan's face. That's the most alert I've heard it since it came in, Nora remarked, stretching as she walked over to join him. Yes, and I think we should take advantage of this moment. Ethan carefully drew a small blood sample from the tiny patient, his movements gentle and precise. The pup barely flinched, too weak to protest. He handed the vial to Nora, who immediately began running it through their in-house analyzer. While waiting for the preliminary results, Ethan picked up the clinic phone and dialed Tessa's number at the city lab. The experienced technician answered on the second ring, already at work despite the early hour. Tessa, it's Ethan Caldwell, about that unusual sample we sent over last night. He detailed their observations and concerns, pacing as he spoke. Interesting case, Ethan, Tessa replied, her voice thoughtful. We should run advanced genetic markers to be certain of the species. The sample you sent should give us initial results within 24 hours. After hanging up, Ethan prepared a special mixture of puppy formula and goat's milk, hoping the combination might prove more appealing to their mysterious patient. To his relief, the pup accepted small amounts, its tiny pink tongue lapping weakly at the offered sustenance. First food is taken, he reported to Nora, who shared his cautious optimism. Together, they prepared a quiet space in the back room, away from the bustle of daily clinic operations. The temporary kennel was lined with soft blankets and equipped with a heating pad set to the perfect temperature. After settling the pup in its new space, Ethan updated Nora about his conversation with Tessa. I think we should get Olivia's input on this once we have the test results, he said, referring to Dr. Vance, his wildlife biologist friend. Something about this case feels different. The morning staff began arriving, their cheerful greetings and casual conversation filtering through the clinic. Ethan watched as Nora organized the day's appointment files, knowing they had a full schedule ahead. Despite his exhaustion, he felt a surge of determination. Whatever this creature was, it deserved their best effort to help it survive. The morning sun climbed higher as the Willow Creek Veterinary Clinic buzzed with its usual weekday activity. At precisely 8 a.m., Nora unlocked the front door and welcomed the first patients of the day. Mrs. Beatrice and her tabby cat Whiskers settled into the waiting area, while Mr. Victor's golden retriever Buddy wagged his tail eagerly by the front desk. Nora juggled phone calls and paperwork with practiced efficiency, occasionally glancing toward the back room where their mysterious patient rested. In exam room 2, Ethan administered routine vaccinations to a pair of sister kittens, his movements automatic despite his exhaustion from the long night. "Did you say something about a strange puppy?" Mrs. Beatrice's voice carried across the waiting room as Nora finished a phone conversation. The elderly woman's eyes sparkled with curiosity behind her thick glasses. "I couldn't help but overhear." Before Nora could respond, Mr. Victor joined the conversation. "A strange puppy? What kind of strange?" The waiting room quickly filled with whispered speculations. Mrs. Fiona suggested it might be an expensive show dog breed, while teenage Owen Parker wondered if it could be some kind of super rare mutant puppy. His mother quickly shushed him, but the excitement had already spread through the room. Mrs. Beatrice, emboldened by her natural role as the town's unofficial news curator, approached the front desk. "Nora, dear, surely you could tell us just a little about it." Just then, Ethan emerged from exam room 2, his white coat slightly rumpled from his long shift. Mrs. Beatrice immediately redirected her attention to him, her arthritis-curved fingers clutching her purse strapped tightly. "Dr. Caldwell, we're all quite interested in this special puppy you're caring for," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to being in the know about town matters. "Perhaps we could have just a tiny peek." Ethan's tired face remained professional and kind as he addressed her request. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Beatrice, but the puppy needs complete isolation right now. It's very young and in a delicate state. We need to minimize any stress or exposure to ensure its recovery." Mrs. Beatrice's lips pursed slightly, but her eyes remained warm. "Well, I suppose that's sensible, but I'll be back this afternoon to check on how things are going. Someone needs to keep track of these interesting developments in our little town." As the morning progressed, Ethan found a brief respite during the lunch hour. He slipped quietly into the back room where the soft hum of medical equipment provided a peaceful backdrop. The pup lay curled in its kennel, its tiny chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm that brought relief to Ethan's worried mind. When he reached in to gently scratch its head, the pup remained peacefully asleep, seemingly undisturbed by the morning's commotion. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the clinic's windows as Ethan finished updating a patient's chart. The familiar chime of the entrance door echoed through the corridor, and he glanced up, expecting to see Mrs. Clara collecting her cat's medication. Instead, the tall, weathered figure of Mr. Hudson filled the doorway, his worn denim jacket and mud-crusted boots marking him as distinctly out of place in the sterile clinic environment. "Afternoon, Doc," Mr. Hudson said, removing his battered baseball cap. His eyes, sharp despite his advanced age, scanned the corridor with practiced precision. "Heard you got yourself an interesting case." Ethan straightened, recognizing the careful way the old farmer chose his words. Mr. Hudson had lived on his property for over 5 decades, and his knowledge of local wildlife was legendary among the townspeople. He'd often helped injured animals and even advised the local rangers about animal patterns and behaviors. "News travels fast in Willow Creek," Ethan replied, trying to maintain a professional distance. But Mr. Hudson's presence stirred something in him, a need for confirmation or perhaps guidance. After a moment's hesitation, Ethan gestured toward the back room. "Would you like to take a quick look?" "Just from a distance, of course." The old farmer nodded, following Ethan down the corridor with silent steps that betrayed his experience in tracking wildlife. In the back room, the pup lay quietly in its enclosure, the soft lighting highlighting its unusual features. Mr. Hudson approached the glass, his weathered hands clasped behind his back as he studied the creature. His expression shifted from curiosity to recognition, then to concern. "That's no dog, Doc," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of certainty. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "What makes you say that? Been watching wild things for longer than you've been alive?" Mr. Hudson explained, never taking his eyes off the pup. "Seen coyotes whelp in my north field, watched fox kits grow up under my barn, even spotted some strange crossbreeds now and then." He tapped the glass gently. "But that face, those eyes, that skull shape, That's wild blood right there. No question about it. The silence that followed felt heavy with implications. After Mr. Hudson left, Ethan remained in the back room, watching the sleeping pup. The day's final appointments waited, but his mind was elsewhere, filled with questions about the creature in his care. He knew he needed expert confirmation, and Dr. Vance's wildlife expertise couldn't come soon enough. The late afternoon sun slanted through the clinic's windows, casting warm golden rectangles across the freshly mopped floors. As the last client, Mrs. Beatrice, and her tabby cat shuffled out the door, Ethan flipped the open sign to closed with a tired but satisfied sigh. The day's steady stream of appointments and curious visitors had left both him and Nora drained. Finally, Nora said, spraying disinfectant on the exam table in room 3. The familiar scent of cleaning solution filled the air as she wiped down surfaces with practiced efficiency. I thought Mrs. Beatrice would never stop asking about our mystery patient. Ethan smiled weakly, settling behind the computer to update the day's records. His fingers moved automatically across the keyboard, but his mind kept drifting to the tiny creature in the back room. The weight of Mr. Hudson's words still hung heavy in his thoughts. After finishing the last file, Ethan grabbed fresh blankets from the supply closet and headed to check on their special patient. The pup was awake, its unusual eyes tracking his movement as he approached the kennel. When he carefully lifted the small creature, it felt warmer and more energetic than before. "Well, look who's feeling better," Ethan murmured, cradling the pup against his chest. To his surprise, the little one started mouthing his sleeve, tiny teeth grazing the fabric playfully. Nora appeared in the doorway, her face lighting up at the sight. "That's the most active I've seen it all day," she said, moving closer to scratch behind the pup's ears. "Maybe we should try offering some solid food soon?" Ethan nodded, but his throat felt tight as he watched the pup's antics. Despite all his professional training and Mr. Hudson's warning about the pup's likely wild origins, he couldn't help feeling deeply invested in this fragile life. The creature's trust in him, shown through its relaxed demeanor and playful behavior, touched something deep in his heart. As evening approached, the clinic grew quiet except for the soft hum of medical equipment. Shadows lengthened across the empty lobby, and the day's warmth began to fade. Ethan had already decided to spend another night at the clinic, unwilling to leave the pup alone during this critical period of recovery. He arranged a makeshift bed of blankets near his office desk, positioning it where he could easily monitor the pup throughout the night. Before dimming the lights, Ethan leaned close to the kennel, whispering softly, "Hang in there, little buddy. We'll figure this out." The morning sun streamed through Ethan's office window as he sat at his desk, phone pressed to his ear. His free hand absently traced patterns on a notepad while he waited for Dr. Olivia Vance to pick up. The pup's medical chart lay open before him, filled with his careful observations from the past 24 hours. "Dr. Vance speaking," came a crisp professional voice on the other end. "Dr. Vance, this is Ethan Caldwell from Willow Creek Veterinary Clinic. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." Ethan straightened in his chair, gathering his thoughts. "I have an unusual situation here that could use your expertise." As Ethan described the mysterious pup, its hairless pink skin, elongated muzzle, and distinctive facial features, he could hear Dr. Vance's interested humming through the phone. He mentioned Mr. Hudson's visit and the farmer's certainty about the pup's wild origins. "The thing is," Ethan continued, running a hand through his hair, "I can't shake the feeling that this isn't just an ordinary domestic puppy. Its features are different, and given your experience with wildlife—" "You're right to call, Doctor," Vance replied. "This definitely warrants investigation. I can rearrange my schedule to visit Willow Creek within the next day or two. Have you noticed any distinctive vocalizations or unusual behavioral patterns?" Nora appeared in the doorway with a stack of files, pausing when she realized Ethan was on an important call. She lingered, organizing papers while listening intently. "For now," Dr. Vance continued, "minimize handling by strangers. That's crucial. Keep detailed notes of feeding patterns, sleep cycles, and any unique behaviors, and maintain a calm environment. Wild animals are particularly sensitive to stress." Nora nodded vigorously at these instructions, already mentally preparing to fend off more curious visitors. "Thank you, Doctor." "Vance," Ethan said, relief evident in his voice. "We'll follow your guidelines and look forward to your visit." After ending the call, Ethan sat back in his chair, processing the conversation. The prospect of getting expert confirmation both relieved and unsettled him. He pushed back from his desk and walked to the back room, where the pup was already awake in its enclosure. The creature's large eyes fixed on him immediately, and it pressed its tiny nose against the glass. Those eyes held such trust, such dependency. Ethan watched as the pup attempted to stand on wobbly legs, its determination evident in every movement. The question that had been nagging Ethan since yesterday grew stronger. If this truly was a wild animal, how would it ever adapt to life outside human care? The morning sun had climbed higher when the clinic's phone rang. Ethan quickly picked up, recognizing Tessa's number from the city lab. He stepped into the quieter lab area of the clinic, away from the busy waiting room. "Dr. Caldwell," Tessa's voice carried a note of intrigue. "I've got some preliminary results from those samples you sent over. There's something unusual about them." Ethan leaned against the counter, his heart quickening. Unusual how? The genetic markers we're seeing, they don't match typical domestic dog profiles. Not even close, actually. The DNA structure shows significant variations that suggest... Tessa paused, shuffling papers on her end. "Well, to be honest, we need to run more comprehensive tests to be certain. Could it be a wolf hybrid? Or maybe coyote?" Ethan asked, thinking back to Mr. Hudson's observations. "That's certainly possible, but I'd rather not speculate until we have more data. We're running additional sequence analyses now." After hanging up, Ethan found Nora restocking supplies in the treatment room. "Tessa called," he said, running a hand through his hair. "The DNA results are interesting." Nora set down the box of syringes she was holding. "Interesting how?" "The markers don't match domestic dogs. She needs more tests, but..." He trailed off, lost in thought. So Mr. Hudson might have been right. Nora's eyes widened. Ethan nodded slowly. "I'm going to run some additional tests with our equipment here. It's not as sophisticated as Tessa's lab, but maybe we can piece together more information." Between scheduled appointments, Ethan worked methodically in the clinic's lab area, running basic blood panels and studying cell structures under the microscope. The pup's blood work showed subtle but distinct differences from the typical canine samples he was used to seeing. Every chance he got, Ethan checked on the mysterious creature. Its transformation from the weak, trembling bundle that arrived 2 nights ago was remarkable. The pup now moved around its kennel with growing confidence, its legs steadier with each passing hour. Occasionally, it would let out high-pitched yips that echoed through the back room, sounds that seemed somehow wilder than a typical puppy's bark. Late afternoon brought a text message from Dr. Vance. "Arriving tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. Have the specimen ready for evaluation." "Dr. Vance is coming tomorrow," Ethan told Nora, showing her the message. She immediately began organizing the back room, clearing space for what would likely be an extensive examination. "I'll make sure everything's ready," Nora said. "Aaron." The early morning sunlight filtered through the clinic windows as Ethan pulled into the parking lot at 7:30 a.m. His stomach churned with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness about Dr. Vance's impending visit. Inside, the familiar smell of antiseptic and the quiet hum of medical equipment greeted him. Making his way to the back room, Ethan found the pup already awake and alert. The tiny creature stood on its hind legs, front paws pressed against the enclosure's glass, watching him with keen interest. Its thin coat had begun to fill in slightly, showing hints of tawny fur beneath the pink skin. "Huh? Good morning, little one," Ethan said softly, checking the water bowl and temperature settings. The pup responded with a high-pitched yip that echoed through the empty clinic. Nora arrived shortly after, carrying fresh towels and wearing her usual cheerful expression. "Big day today," she said, heading straight to the waiting area with cleaning supplies in hand. She worked efficiently, wiping down surfaces and arranging magazines, wanting everything perfect for their distinguished visitor. At precisely 9 a.m., the clinic door opened with a gentle chime. Dr. Olivia Vance stepped inside, her presence commanding immediate attention. She carried a sleek black case in one hand and wore khaki field clothes that spoke of her hands-on work with wildlife. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her eyes sparkled with professional curiosity. "Ethan," she greeted warmly, extending her hand. "It's been too long. Where's this mysterious patient of yours?" Ethan led her to the back room, with Nora following close behind. Dr. Vance set her case on the examination table and opened it, revealing an array of specialized tools, calipers, measuring tape, and various diagnostic instruments Ethan didn't recognize. The examination was methodical and thorough. Dr. Vance gently lifted the pup onto the padded table, speaking in low, soothing tones as she worked. Her trained hands moved with practiced precision, measuring the length and shape of the muzzle, checking the alignment of tiny teeth, and examining the distinctive triangular ears. "Notice the paw structure here," she murmured, holding up one of the pup's feet, and the particular angle of the ear set. She made detailed notes in a small notebook, occasionally pausing to take photographs with a professional camera. The pup remained surprisingly calm throughout the examination, only squirming occasionally when Dr. Vance checked its belly. Ethan couldn't help but feel proud of how well-adjusted the creature had become under their care. After about an hour of careful observation and measurements, Dr. Vance straightened up and crossed her arms, her expression thoughtful. She looked at Ethan and Nora, who had been watching intently from nearby. "Based on what I'm seeing here," she began, "and combining this with your initial test data, I can say with reasonable confidence that you have a coyote pup approximately 6 to 7 weeks old." Ethan felt his chest tighten. Finally, they had an answer, but it brought with it a whole new set of concerns. He exchanged glances with Nora, who looked equally conflicted about this revelation. The morning sun cast long shadows across Ethan's cluttered desk as he, Dr. Vance, and Nora gathered around the scattered papers and lab reports. The small office felt cramped with 3 people, but none of them seemed to mind. In a plush carrier nearby, the pup dozed peacefully, its tiny chest rising and falling in steady rhythm after the thorough examination. "Let me be clear about the situation, Doctor," Vance began, pulling out a thick folder from her bag. "Keeping wildlife, especially predators like coyotes, isn't just complicated, it's illegal in most cases." She spread several documents across the desk, pointing to highlighted sections of wildlife regulations. Ethan leaned forward in his chair, his forehead creasing with concern. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders as he studied the papers before him. Nora stood beside him, her hand resting supportively on the back of his chair. "Even with the best intentions," Dr. Vance continued, her voice gentle but firm, "raising a wild animal in captivity can cause serious problems. They develop differently than domestic pets. Without proper socialization from their own species, they can't learn vital survival skills." Nora spoke up, her voice quiet. "But it's so young. Wouldn't it be too vulnerable to survive in the wild now?" Dr. Vance nodded, understanding. "That's why wildlife rehabilitation centers exist. They have specialized programs for young predators, teaching them how to hunt and survive while minimizing human contact." Ethan glanced at the sleeping pup, his chest tight with emotion. "And legally, if authorities discover you're housing a wild coyote without proper permits and facilities," Dr. Vance explained, "you could face significant fines. It could even impact your veterinary license." The room fell silent, except for the soft whirring of the office computer. Ethan ran his hands through his hair, feeling the weight of the decision ahead. He'd known this moment might come, but that didn't make it any easier. "Look, Doctor," Vance said, her tone softening, "we should wait for the final DNA confirmation before making any decisions. I can run some specialized tests in my lab. We'll have definitive results within days." She gathered her papers, organizing them back into the folder. "Until then, keep doing what you're doing. The pup is clearly thriving under your care." Ethan nodded, grateful for the temporary reprieve. He watched as the pup stirred in its carrier, stretching tiny paws in its sleep. Despite knowing what might come next, he couldn't help hoping for some alternative that would allow him to continue caring for this small creature that had so unexpectedly entered his life. The afternoon sun beat down on Willow Creek's main street as Ethan stepped out of his clinic, squinting against the bright light. His stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since early morning. The small cafe 2 blocks down beckoned with promises of their famous Turkey Club sandwich. As he walked, several townspeople waved and called out greetings, Mrs. Sylvia, watering the flowers outside her gift shop, smiled warmly. Beautiful day, isn't it, Doctor? Caldwell. Inside the cafe, the lunch rush was just beginning to thin out. Ethan had barely placed his order when Wyatt Brooks, who owned the hardware store, slid into the seat across from him. Say, Doc, Wyatt leaned forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially. Heard you've got something special at the clinic. Some kind of rare breed? Ethan shifted in his seat, maintaining a professional smile. Just providing care for an animal in need, Wyatt. Nothing unusual about that. The sandwich arrived, but before Ethan could take a bite, Wyatt pressed on. My wife says Mrs. Yvonne told her it might be some kind of exotic pet. That true? I appreciate everyone's concern, Ethan replied carefully, but I can't discuss specific patients. Doctor-patient confidentiality applies to animals too. Finally breaking free from Wyatt's questioning, Ethan headed back toward the clinic. He'd barely made it halfway when Mrs. Hazel appeared, walking her elderly golden retriever, Buddy. Dr. Caldwell, she called out, tugging Buddy's leash to stop beside him. Is it true what they're saying about you keeping a wild animal at the clinic? Mrs. Hazel, Ethan responded diplomatically, we're simply providing medical care to an animal that needed help. Nothing more complicated than that. Back inside the clinic's air-conditioned sanctuary, Nora met him with an exasperated look. The phone hasn't stopped ringing, she reported, holding up a stack of message slips. Everyone wants to know about our mystery patient. Mrs. Ruby even offered to bring over some special puppy treats. Just keep telling them what we discussed, Ethan instructed, loosening his collar. We're providing medical care to a found animal. That's all they need to know. As evening approached, Ethan made his final rounds. In the back room, the pup was more energetic than ever, bouncing around its enclosure and letting out excited little yips when it saw him. The sound made Ethan smile despite his stressful afternoon. He carefully checked the pup's temperature, heart rate, and breathing, all normal. The townspeople's curiosity might be mounting, but Ethan remained focused on his primary concern, ensuring this small creature received the care it needed until they knew exactly what they were dealing with. The morning sun filtered through the clinic's windows as Nora organized the day's medical files behind the reception desk. Mrs. Ruby and Mrs. Daphne, two regular clients waiting for their pets' checkups, huddled near the water cooler, their voices carrying across the quiet lobby. I saw it on the Willow Creek community board last night, Mrs. Ruby whispered, though not quietly enough. Someone posted that Dr. Caldwell is keeping a baby coyote here at the clinic. Mrs. Daphne gasped. A coyote? But those creatures killed 3 of my neighbor's chickens last spring. Nora's hands froze over the files. Her heart raced as she listened to their conversation continue. Well, my sister's friend works at the city lab, Mrs. Ruby added. She says they ran some tests and it's definitely not a regular puppy. Without finishing her filing, Nora hurried down the hallway to Ethan's office. She found him reviewing patient charts at his desk. Ethan, we have a problem, she said, closing the door behind her. There's a rumor online about the pup being a coyote. People are talking. Ethan quickly pulled up the local community forum on his computer. There it was, a detailed post speculating about their mysterious patient, complete with partial lab results that shouldn't have been public. Comments flooded the post, ranging from concern to outrage. This isn't good, Ethan muttered, reaching for his phone to call Tessa at the lab. Tessa answered on the second ring. Ethan, I was just about to call you, she said, sounding apologetic. One of our new technicians mentioned the case to a friend. I'm so sorry. We're dealing with it internally. Before Ethan could respond, Nora knocked on his door again. Dr. Caldwell, there are reporters outside, 2 from the local paper and 1 from the regional news station. Ethan rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on. Through the window, he could see the reporters setting up cameras in the parking lot. One held a microphone emblazoned with the Channel 7 logo. He stepped outside with Nora, maintaining his professional composure. I understand there's a lot of interest in one of our patients, he addressed the small crowd. However, we don't have final test results yet, and I won't speculate about unconfirmed information. Our priority is providing appropriate medical care. Dr. Caldwell, is it true you're harboring a wild coyote? One reporter called out. What about public safety concerns? Another added. Ethan held up his hands. No further comments at this time. Please respect our patient's privacy. Back inside, Ethan and Nora implemented immediate security measures. They moved the pup to a more secluded area and posted staff-only signs on the backroom doors. Nora rearranged appointments to use only the front examination rooms. As the afternoon sun began to fade, Ethan typed out an urgent message to Dr. Vance. Situation complicated by leaked information. Need final test results as soon as possible. Please advise on next steps. The evening sun cast long shadows through the clinic windows as Ethan settled into his office chair. The clock read 5:15 p.m., and the last client had finally left after a hectic day of deflecting questions about the mysterious pup. Papers scattered across his desk demanded attention. Vaccine records, supply orders, and lab reports all needed reviewing. Nora poked her head in. "I'm heading out for the day. Do you need anything before I go?" "No thanks." "Get some rest," Ethan replied, managing a tired smile. Wyatt Aro might be another long one. The quiet that settled over the clinic felt like a relief after the day's chaos. Ethan could hear the soft whimpers of the pup from the back room, a sound that had become oddly comforting over the past few days. A sharp knock at the front door made him jump. Through the glass, he could make out two uniformed figures standing in the fading daylight. His stomach tightened as he recognized the official wildlife department patches on their jackets. Ethan unlocked the door, greeting the stern-faced visitors. "Good evening. Dr. Caldwell, I'm Ranger Gavin, and this is Officer Kendall from State Wildlife," the taller man said, showing his credentials. "We've received multiple reports about a possible coyote pup being kept here at your clinic. We'll need to see the animal in question," Officer Kendall added, her clipboard ready. Ethan nodded, leading them through the quiet hallway to the back room. The pup lifted its head as they entered, ears perking up at the new voices. Ranger Gavin stepped closer to the enclosure, studying the creature with experienced eyes. "How long have you had this animal?" Officer Kendall asked, making notes. "About 4 days," Ethan explained, recounting Jasper's discovery of the pup and the subsequent medical care provided. "We're still waiting on final DNA confirmation of the species." Ranger Gavin straightened up, crossing his arms. "Doctor, I appreciate that you are trying to help, but keeping a wild animal without proper permits is a serious violation. There are specific protocols for handling wildlife cases." "I understand," Ethan replied, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "We've been consulting with Dr. Vance, a wildlife biologist, and—" "Dr. Olivia Vance?" Ranger Gavin interrupted, his expression softening slightly. "She's well respected in our department." Officer Kendall consulted her phone briefly. "Given Dr. Vance's involvement in pending DNA results, we can give you until Friday to get everything sorted out. We'll return then to evaluate the situation and determine appropriate placement for the animal." "Thank you," Ethan said, relief washing over him. "I appreciate your understanding." The officials left shortly after, their patrol vehicle's headlights sweeping across the parking lot as they drove away. Ethan locked the front door again and returned to the back room. The pup was curled up in its blanket, watching him with those trusting eyes that had captured his heart days ago. He adjusted the blanket over the enclosure, ensuring the pup would feel secure for the night. The weight of the wildlife authorities' impending return pressed heavily on his thoughts as he gathered his things to head home. Ethan arrived at the clinic just as dawn was breaking, his mind replaying the wildlife officer's visit from the previous evening. He hadn't slept well, tossing and turning with worry about both the pup's future and the legal implications of the situation. The morning air was crisp as he unlocked the clinic doors, heading straight to the back room. Nora arrived shortly after, already organizing files for the day's appointments. "How's our little patient?" she called out, setting up the front desk. "Seems okay," Ethan replied, watching the pup paw playfully at his blanket. The sight brought a small smile to his face. At least the creature still had some energy, despite everything happening around it. But as the morning progressed, Ethan's relief turned to concern. During his routine check around 10 a.m., he noticed the pup lying listlessly in its enclosure, barely responding when he approached. The formula that usually drew eager licks remained untouched in its bowl. "Nora," he called out, his voice tight with worry, "can you come here for a moment?" The pup's breathing had become shallow and labored, each intake of air accompanied by a soft, distressing whine. Ethan's experienced hands moved quickly, checking vital signs while Nora held the trembling creature steady. The thermometer confirmed his fears. The pup was running a significant fever. "This isn't good," Ethan muttered, reaching for his medical supplies. "It could be pneumonia. We see it sometimes in orphaned wildlife. Their immune systems are so fragile without their mothers." Working efficiently, Ethan prepared an injection of broad-spectrum antibiotics. The pup barely flinched as the needle went in, a concerning sign given how usually responsive it was to handling. He set up an IV line for fluids, hoping to combat any dehydration that might be setting in. By noon, instead of improving, the pup's condition had deteriorated further. Its tiny body shuddered with each breath, and the whimpering had grown weaker but more constant. Ethan's shirt was damp with sweat as he monitored the oxygen levels and adjusted the fluid flow. "Cancel all my afternoon appointments," he instructed Nora, not taking his eyes off the pup. "This little one needs constant monitoring." Nora nodded, already reaching for the phone. "I'll call Dr. Vance too. Maybe she has experience with similar cases." Ethan pulled up a stool next to the enclosure, his focus entirely on the struggling creature before him. The morning's warmth had given way to the cool air conditioning of the clinic, but he barely noticed, too intent on catching any change in the pup's condition. His hand rested gently on the enclosure's glass, as if trying to transfer some of his own strength to the tiny patient within. The fluorescent lights hummed softly in the empty clinic as Ethan sat beside the pup's enclosure, his stethoscope ready for constant monitoring. Nora moved efficiently around the treatment area, organizing medications and preparing fresh IV bags. The clock on the wall showed 7:30 p.m., well past closing time, but neither of them had any intention of leaving. "Temperature still 103.8, Ethan announced, his voice tight with concern. The pup lay curled in its warming blanket, its chest rising and falling with concerning speed. Each labored breath seemed to take more effort than the last. Nora held her phone on speaker as Dr. Vance's voice crackled through. "Keep the temperature stable," the wildlife expert advised. "If you have oxygen support available, start it at a low flow rate. The most important thing is maintaining hydration levels." Ethan nodded, though Dr. Vance couldn't see him. "We've got him on IV fluids, and I started broad-spectrum antibiotics about 8 hours ago." The hours crawled by like molasses. At 10 p.m., Nora insisted Ethan take a short break while she monitored the pup. He reluctantly stepped away, only to return 15 minutes later with coffee for them both. The pup's fever spiked again around 11 p.m., causing a fresh wave of concern. "Come on, little one," Ethan whispered, adjusting the oxygen flow. "You've got to fight this." As midnight approached, the pup grew increasingly restless, its weak cries piercing the quiet clinic. Each whimper felt like a knife in Ethan's heart. After consulting his medical references, he carefully administered a mild sedative to help ease the pup's distress. Nora took another monitoring shift around 1 a.m., allowing Ethan to doze in his office chair, but sleep wouldn't come. His mind kept racing with possible complications and treatment adjustments. The responsibility of this tiny life weighed heavily on his shoulders. By 3 a.m., a subtle change caught their attention. The pup's breathing, while still labored, had settled into a more regular pattern. Ethan checked the temperature again, 102.1, still elevated, but significantly better than earlier. "Look at that," Nora whispered, relief evident in her voice. "The fever's breaking." Ethan nodded, allowing himself a small smile as he gently stroked the pup's fur through the enclosure opening. The creature's eyes fluttered briefly at his touch, but remained peaceful. Nora squeezed his shoulder before heading to the break room for some much-needed rest. In the quiet pre-dawn hours, Ethan maintained his vigil. The pup's chest rose and fell with growing stability, each breath a little stronger than the last. Through the clinic's windows, the night sky began to lighten, stars fading as morning approached. Ethan continued his gentle ministrations, his medical training warring with his growing attachment to this remarkable little survivor. The morning sun streamed through the clinic windows, casting long shadows across the treatment area. Ethan's exhausted eyes squinted at the thermometer display. Wow, 1.2 degrees. Finally, a normal temperature. His shoulders relaxed slightly as he recorded the reading in the medical chart. "Look who's feeling better," Nora whispered, her tired smile reflecting the relief they both felt. She carefully prepared a shallow dish with warm formula, adding a drop of honey for energy. Despite having been up most of the night, she moved with practiced efficiency. The pup stirred in its enclosure, lifting its head at the sound of their voices. Its eyes, though still glassy, tracked their movements with more awareness than the previous night. Ethan performed a thorough check of its vital signs, noting the improvement in breathing rate and heart rhythm. "Want to try some breakfast, little one?" Ethan asked softly, carefully lifting the pup to check its hydration levels. The skin bounced back normally when pinched. Another good sign. Nora held the dish while Ethan supported the pup's head. To their delight, the pup showed interest in the formula. Its tiny pink tongue darted out, lapping tentatively at first, then with growing enthusiasm. Ethan and Nora exchanged hopeful glances as the pup consumed about half the portion. "That's the best thing I've seen all week," Nora said, wiping a few drops of formula from the pup's chin with a soft cloth. The clinic phone rang around 9 o'clock. Dr. Vance's familiar voice came through the speaker, eager for an update. Ethan detailed the night's events, the successful treatment, and the morning's improvements. "That's excellent news, Doctor," Vance responded, genuine relief in her tone. "But Ethan, you know what comes next. If this is indeed a coyote pup, which seems increasingly likely, it will need specialized care. The sooner we can transfer it to a proper wildlife facility, the better its chances of successful rehabilitation and release." Ethan's chest tightened at her words, though he knew she was right. He watched the pup through the enclosure glass, now curled up peacefully after its meal. The tiny creature had fought so hard to survive, and Ethan had fought alongside it. The thought of letting go made his throat constrict. Nora placed a comforting hand on his arm, understanding written across her features. They both knew the reality of the situation. Their role was to heal and protect, but not to keep. The wildlife officials would return soon, expecting answers and action. The pup's recovery, while wonderful, meant decisions could no longer be postponed. As Ethan hung up the phone, he took a deep breath, trying to reconcile his professional knowledge with his personal feelings. The pup yawned and stretched in its bed, unaware of the complex emotions it had stirred in its caretakers. The late morning sun filtered through the blinds in Ethan's office, casting striped shadows across his desk. At precisely 10 a.m., the clinic phone's sharp ring cut through the quiet. Ethan's hand hesitated for just a moment before picking up the receiver, his heart thumping against his ribs. Nora stood nearby, wringing her hands nervously. "Dr. Caldwell speaking," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Ethan, it's Tessa from the lab," came the familiar voice. "I have those final DNA results you've been waiting for." Ethan's fingers tightened around the phone. "Go ahead, Tessa. The genetic markers are conclusive," Tessa explained carefully. "The pup is 100% Canis latrans, a pure coyote. No domestic dog genes present at all. I'm sorry about the preliminary results getting leaked, but at least now you have definitive answers." The words hit Ethan like a physical weight. He closed his eyes, letting his head rest against the back of his chair. Though he'd suspected this outcome, hearing it confirmed made everything suddenly, painfully real. The tiny creature they'd nursed back to health, the one that looked up at them with such trust, wasn't a pet they could keep. It was wild through and through. "Thank you, Tessa," he managed. "I appreciate your thoroughness." After hanging up, Ethan turned to Nora, who had been watching his face intently throughout the call. "It's official," he said softly. "Our little friend is a coyote." Nora nodded, but her eyes grew shiny with tears. She blinked rapidly, trying to maintain composure. "I knew it was coming," she whispered, "but it still hurts." Ethan pulled out his phone and composed a text to Dr. Vance. "DNA results confirm 100% coyote. Please advise on next steps with rehab center." The response came quickly. "We'll contact wildlife rehab immediately. You'll need to inform rangers ASAP." Before making that crucial call to Ranger Gavin, Ethan walked to the back room where the pup was sleeping peacefully in its enclosure. The morning's medication had helped it rest comfortably. He reached in and gently stroked its ears, noting how they twitched slightly at his touch. The pup's chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, unaware that its future was about to change dramatically. For just a moment, Ethan allowed himself to feel the full weight of his attachment to this small creature. His fingers lingered on its soft fur, memorizing the texture, knowing their time together was drawing to a close. The early afternoon sun cast warm patches across the clinic's back room as Ethan paced near the pup's enclosure. His footsteps made soft, scuffing sounds against the linoleum floor while he wrestled with the weight of decisions ahead. The coyote pup dozed peacefully, its tiny chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm, completely unaware of the turmoil surrounding its future. Nora appeared in the doorway, having just finished cleaning up from the morning appointments. Her face showed the same mix of concern and affection that Ethan felt. She pulled up a chair near the enclosure, watching the sleeping pup. "I know we've been preparing for this," Ethan said quietly, breaking the silence but actually making the call. His voice trailed off as he ran a hand through his hair. Nora nodded, understanding filling her eyes. "It's amazing how quickly you can get attached, isn't it?" She reached through the enclosure's opening to stroke the pup's fur. "Those little yips when he's excited about breakfast, the way he follows us with those big eyes, and how he tries to play with the towels during cleaning time," Ethan added with a sad smile. "But we both know what needs to happen next." "Dr. Vance explained it well," Nora said, straightening up in her chair. "The rehabilitation center knows exactly how to prepare young coyotes for wild release. They'll make sure he learns proper hunting skills, how to interact with his own kind." Ethan stopped pacing and leaned against the wall. "That's what worries me, too. We've been his whole world for these past days. He's already showing signs of human bonding." He watched as the pup stirred slightly in its sleep. "The longer we wait, the harder it might be for him to develop normal coyote behaviors." "The rehab specialists deal with this all the time," Nora reminded him gently. "They know how to help him transition." Ethan pulled his phone from his pocket, staring at it for a long moment. "You're right, it's time." He pulled up the number Dr. Vance had provided for the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center and pressed dial. The phone rang twice before a professional voice answered. Ethan explained their situation, the rescued pup, the confirmed DNA results, the recent health scare, and their need for proper wildlife care. The center staff member was understanding and efficient, agreeing to take the pup as soon as it was stable enough for transport. 3 days from now would be ideal, the staff member suggested. That will give him time to recover fully from the pneumonia. Ethan scheduled the pickup, his voice remaining steady despite the emotion building in his chest. As he ended the call, he looked at Nora, who gave him a supportive nod. They both knew they'd made the right decision, even if it wasn't the easiest one. The morning sun filtered through the clinic windows as Ethan conducted his early check on the coyote pup. His face brightened at what he saw. The tiny creature was not only alert, but standing steadily on all fours, its thin tail wagging with newfound energy. The clock had just struck 9 a.m. when the first clients began arriving, bringing with them the usual morning bustle. Nora efficiently managed the front desk, directing pet owners to the waiting area while keeping them away from the back room where the pup rested. The gentle clicking of computer keys mixed with quiet conversation as she scheduled appointments and processed paperwork. Throughout the morning, Ethan divided his attention between regular patients and the recovering pup. During breaks between appointments, he carefully monitored its progress, noting with satisfaction how it responded to their continued care. The pup's eyes were bright and curious, tracking his movements around the room. Following Dr. Vance's strict guidelines, Ethan and Nora established a careful feeding schedule. Every few hours, they offered small portions of specially prepared formula, which the pup eagerly lapped up. Its appetite had returned in full force, a promising sign of recovery. In the afternoon, Ethan led the pup to the clinic's enclosed backyard. The space, normally used for walking recovering patients, provided a safe area for supervised exploration. He watched as a tiny creature took tentative steps onto the grass, its nose twitching at the new sensations. Each blade of grass seemed to spark something primitive in the pup, an awakening of sorts. It would pause, sniff intently, then move forward with growing confidence. Nora joined them during these outdoor sessions, maintaining a respectful distance as Dr. Vance had advised. She couldn't help smiling as the pup investigated a fallen leaf, jumping back startled when it crinkled under its paw. Ethan pulled out his phone, capturing these precious moments on camera. Each photo would serve as a reminder of their brief but meaningful time together. Following the wildlife expert's guidance, they carefully limited the pup's exposure to other people. When clients asked about the special patient, Nora politely deflected their questions. They understood that minimizing human contact was crucial for the pup's future success in the wild. As evening approached, Ethan prepared the pup's enclosure for the night. He arranged fresh blankets and ensured water was within easy reach. The pup settled into its bed, tired from the day's activities but noticeably stronger than before. Ethan secured the enclosure door, his movements gentle but purposeful. Though his heart ached at the thought of their upcoming separation, he found comfort in knowing they were doing what was best for the wild creature in their care. The mid-morning sun cast long rectangles of light across the clinic floor as Ethan sorted through a thick manila folder. Inside were detailed records of the coyote pup's journey, from that first desperate night to its remarkable recovery. He methodically arranged each document: blood work results, temperature charts, medication schedules, and Dr. Vance's consultation notes. Everything needed to be perfect for tomorrow's handoff to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. Nora approached his desk with fresh coffee, her movements deliberately quiet to avoid disturbing the pup in its nearby enclosure. "I've typed up the feeding schedule they requested," she said, adding another paper to the growing file, "and I noted which formula blend worked best." The clinic felt unusually peaceful. Ethan had intentionally kept the day's appointment schedule light, booking only essential visits. A few regular clients had called asking about the special patient, but Nora had politely explained they weren't accepting drop-in visitors. In the late morning, Ethan conducted another thorough health check on the pup. Its fur, once sparse and patchy, now showed promising growth, soft gray tufts sprouting where pink skin had been visible just days ago. The pup's muscles felt firmer under his gentle examination, and its movements were more coordinated. When he offered water, it drank eagerly, showing none of the hesitation from its first days at the clinic. The phone rang shortly after lunch. Ranger Gavin's steady voice confirmed tomorrow's pickup time, 2 p.m. sharp. "We'll bring appropriate transport equipment," he assured Ethan. "The rehabilitation center is ready to receive the pup." Ethan thanked him, his voice catching slightly as he hung up. Nora spent the afternoon preparing supplies for the rehab center. She carefully measured portions of the special formula into labeled containers and packed them alongside detailed feeding instructions. The medications, antibiotics, and supplements went into a separate bag with clear dosage guidelines. Her movements were precise but tinged with melancholy. As the day wound down and the last client left, silence settled over the clinic. Ethan and Nora found themselves standing before the pup's enclosure, watching as it dozed peacefully on its blanket. The creature had no idea how much its presence had affected them, or how tomorrow would change everything. "Wyatt Oro will do what's best for you," Ethan said softly, his words barely above a whisper. The pup's ears twitched at his voice, and it opened its eyes, regarding them with that familiar, bright, trusting gaze. Nora wiped quickly at her eyes, turning away to busy herself with straightening already neat supplies. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky as Ethan prepared for the inevitable goodbye. In the back room of Willow Creek Veterinary Clinic, the coyote pup stirred from its sleep, stretching its small limbs in the familiar enclosure. Its fur caught the sunlight streaming through the window, showing how much healthier it looked compared to that first desperate night. Ethan conducted one final examination with practiced hands that trembled slightly. Temperature normal, heart rate steady, breathing clear. He documented everything meticulously, though his pen lingered longer than necessary on each line of the chart. The pup nuzzled his hand, seeking attention as it always did during checkups. Nora appeared with a professional-grade pet carrier, lined with soft blankets and equipped with secure latches. "It's almost time," she said softly, setting the carrier down. Together, they coaxed the pup inside, making sure it had enough space to move comfortably. Out in the parking lot, the afternoon sun beat down on the asphalt. Ethan and Nora stood quietly beside the carrier, listening to the occasional rustle from within. The pup remained calm, used to their presence and the gentle handling of the past weeks. Right on schedule, a white truck with official Wildlife Department markings pulled into the lot. Ranger Gavin stepped out first, followed by Officer Kendall. Their faces were professional, but kind as they approached. Dr. Caldwell, Ranger Gavin, nodded respectfully. We appreciate how well you've handled this situation." Ethan handed over the thick folder of medical records, his voice steady despite the emotion tightening his chest. "Everything's documented. Medical history, feeding schedules, medication details. The rehab center should find it helpful." While Officer Kendall reviewed the paperwork, Ethan knelt beside the carrier. He reached through the door one last time, his fingers finding that spot behind the pup's ears that always calmed it. The pup pressed into his touch, making soft whimpering sounds. Nora stood nearby, wiping tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand. She'd grown just as attached to their unexpected patient, spending countless hours monitoring its recovery. After the final forms were signed, the officers carefully lifted the carrier. The pup let out a startled whine at the movement, and Ethan couldn't help himself. "You'll be okay, little one," he whispered, his words carrying all the care and hope he had for its future. The carrier was secured in the truck's specially equipped compartment. Engines rumbled to life, and Ethan and Nora watched as the vehicle pulled away, taking with it the tiny creature that had changed their lives in such a short time. Standing in the warm afternoon air, Ethan felt the weight of Nora's grief beside him. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, offering what comfort he could. Their eyes fell on the empty carrier stand, left on the pavement, a stark reminder of what they'd just let go. 1 week after the coyote pup's departure, Willow Creek Veterinary Clinic hummed with its usual rhythm. The waiting room chairs held an assortment of pets and their owners. Mrs. Sylvia's elderly golden retriever sprawled across the floor, while the Ruby's cat meowed softly in its carrier. A young girl clutched a pet carrier containing a fluffy white rabbit waiting for its annual checkup. Ethan moved through his morning appointments with professional efficiency, but the empty space in the back room still caught his attention whenever he passed by. He found himself pausing briefly at the spot where the pup's enclosure had been, now replaced with standard medical supplies. Nora maintained her cheerful demeanor at the front desk, greeting clients warmly and managing the day's schedule. Yet her eyes occasionally drifted to the drawer where she tucked away the pup's face. She was unable to bring herself to dispose of it just yet. Around mid-morning, Dr. Vance's name flashed on the clinic phone display. Nora quickly transferred the call to Ethan's office, her heart beating a little faster with anticipation. "The little one is doing remarkably well, Doctor," Vance reported, her voice warm with enthusiasm. "It's already showing natural coyote behaviors. You should see how it perks up when the other pups start their evening howling sessions." As she spoke, Ethan's phone pinged with incoming photos. Each image showed their former patient looking stronger and more vibrant. The pup's coat had filled in considerably, taking on the distinctive coloring of a young coyote. In one photo, it stood alert beside 2 other coyote pups, its posture confident and natural. Nora leaned over Ethan's desk to see the pictures, her face breaking into a broad smile. "Look at those healthy eyes," she exclaimed, pointing to a close-up shot where the pup's gaze showed clear alertness and wild spirit. Ethan felt tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying release from his shoulders. The pup wasn't just surviving, it was thriving, becoming the wild creature it was meant to be. Dr. Vance explained how the rehabilitation team was gradually introducing natural feeding behaviors and social interactions with other young coyotes. After ending the call, Ethan stood up from his desk with renewed energy. He had 3 more appointments waiting, including a senior cat's dental cleaning and a puppy's first vaccination series. The weight of uncertainty about the coyote pup's fate had lifted, allowing him to focus fully on his current patients. Nora caught his eye as he headed toward exam room 2. "We did the right thing," she said softly, voicing the thought they'd both been holding on to. Ethan nodded, grateful for her steady presence through the whole experience. Together they returned to their regular duties, carrying the quiet satisfaction of knowing they'd helped give a wild creature its best chance at a natural life. The autumn morning painted the landscape in rich golds and deep reds as Ethan's truck wound its way along the sanctuary's gravel road. Nora sat quietly in the passenger seat, clutching a travel mug of coffee, while fallen leaves swirled in their wake. They'd left Willow Creek before dawn, following Dr. Vance's detailed directions to the release site. "Almost there," Ethan said, checking the GPS one last time. The sanctuary stretched across hundreds of protected acres, offering the perfect habitat for wildlife rehabilitation and release. As they rounded the final bend, they spotted several vehicles already parked near a rustic wooden building. Dr. Vance's SUV, Ranger Gavin's official truck, and Officer Kendall's department vehicle. Dr. Vance greeted them with a warm smile, her clipboard tucked under one arm. "Perfect timing," she said, leading them toward a series of large enclosures. "Our friend is ready for the big day." Ethan's breath caught as they approached. There, in the largest enclosure, stood the coyote they'd nursed back to health. Gone was the fragile, hairless pup. In its place was a magnificent young adult coyote with thick, healthy fur and alert eyes. Its coat had developed the characteristic tawny gray coloring, and its movements showed the fluid grace of a wild animal. Nora whispered, "Look how beautiful it's become." The coyote's ears twitched at the sound of their voices. It turned, fixing them with intelligent eyes. For a moment, something flickered in its gaze, a shadow of recognition perhaps, or just wild curiosity. Ethan felt his chest tighten with emotion. Ranger Gavin and Officer Kendall approached, nodding respectfully. They'd come to appreciate Ethan's dedication to doing what was right for the animal, even when it meant letting go. "The transformation is remarkable, Doctor," Vance explained, checking her notes. "It's been hunting successfully in the enclosure, displaying proper social behaviors with other coyotes, and showing appropriate wariness of humans. All signs point to a successful rehabilitation." She moved toward the enclosure gate, her movements deliberate and calm. The coyote watched, muscles tensed with anticipation. For when the gate swung open, the animal paused, assessing its surroundings. Then, with decisive steps, it moved forward onto the dewy grass. At the edge of the forest, the coyote hesitated. It turned its head, golden eyes sweeping across the gathered humans one last time. Ethan stood perfectly still, his heart full of pride and bittersweet joy. Then, with fluid grace, the coyote slipped into the underbrush, its form melting into the dappled shadows of the forest. Nora reached for Ethan's hand, tears streaming freely down her face. He squeezed back, his own eyes misting over as they watched their former patient disappear into its true home. The tale of Ethan Caldwell and the little coyote pup isn't just a gripping rescue story. It's a profound lesson in compassion, duty, and the courage to let go for something greater. From the moment Ethan thought he'd saved a puppy, to the shocking truth that flipped his world, he fought tirelessly to give this wild creature a chance at life. Though saying goodbye hurt, watching that coyote step into the forest with free, fearless eyes was the ultimate reward, proving that sometimes love means letting it return to where it belongs. If this journey moved you, if the bond between humanity and nature struck a chord, stick with us for more incredible stories like this. Please hit that subscribe button on our YouTube channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Together, we can spread hope and celebrate the beauty of the wild. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.